If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that growing up, I was obsessed with superheroes. I read my DC and Marvel encyclopedias for fun, made countless AMVs, and filled sketchbooks with various vigilantes. I watched so much Justice League as a kid that all of the discs were scratched. It occupied at least 98% of the space in my brain. Unlike now, where it's probably only 50%. These characters have truly shaped my life in ways that I might never even fully realize. Needless to say, I love X-Men the Animated Series. I mean, who doesn't? It's got blood, and guts, and love, and hate. It's got entertainment. Okay, maybe not the blood and guts part, but I can't pass up a good Mojo quote. I've forced multiple friends to watch the show with me. So imagine my surprise in November of 2021 when Marvel announced that they were bringing us back to this iconic world, to these definitive versions of the characters, these characters that I love, that I hold so close to my heart. But of course, I had mixed feelings. I still have mixed feelings. Can you bring back such an iconic show? Should you bring back such an iconic series? I can't deny that I am excited for the show. I love 90s X-Men. I was not alive when this show was coming out, so this is my chance to experience the show in a whole new way. Not as a viewer looking back on one of the greatest shows ever made, but as an active participant in its unraveling. Don't let this video fool you, I will 100% be watching that. But the closer we get, I start to remember an all too familiar place I found myself back in 2019. Now, unlike X-Men, I was very much alive and conscious when Young Justice seasons 1 and 2 were coming out, so you can imagine my delight, nay, euphoria, when it was announced there was going to be a third season. I could not wait to see what happened to that world, where the characters were. It was a chance to go back and continue something truly great. The Young Justice show's tie-in comics were some of the first I ever got from a comic shop. I had enough action figures to put together the Build-A-Figure Amazo. The 6 years spent waiting for the show to return were full of hype and high expectations. Then Young Justice Season 3 came out. It's not like the worst thing I've ever watched, but my disappointment was palpable. The show stretches itself even thinner between all the characters, it fails to have a gripping overarching plot, and worst of all, it came across as mean-spirited and cruel. There's blood in the show now, which has its place in media, but it gives such tonal whiplash after 2 seasons of airing with regular children's programming. It is also so frequently used against Halo that it feels targeted. Halo kissing Harper Row when they both have boyfriends also only played into harmful stereotypes. It managed to mischaracterize an underrated Bat Family character before she even had her chance as a hero. While the original show certainly took itself seriously, the revival turned it into a gritty and pessimistic world. Even Season 4, when circling back to some of the original characters, fails to capture the same charm as the original. There were good parts, sure, but the bad always outweighed them. Toto, I don't think we're at Cartoon Network anymore. I still watched all of Young Justice, even though it managed to get itself cancelled on a cliffhanger. There were inklings of that classic show between the twist of the traitor at the end of Season 3 and the complexities of characters such as Mary Marvel that I wanted to see expanded upon, but we're likely not to see the conclusion of that show anytime soon. Worst of all, Wally West will never escape the Speed Force. Or maybe he will in another 6 years. The show was revived only to be lesser than the earlier seasons that made me fall in love with the characters. You're a smart cookie, you can probably smell what I'm stepping in. A little thing called Parallels, a beloved superhero show supposedly coming back from the grave, only to land with a splat. Not to stick with the DC analogies in a script focused on Marvel, but even the DCAU wasn't able to escape this fate. A series of shows so phenomenal, with a perfect ending, had continuations do nothing but tarnish the legacy that the show so carefully crafted. Justice League vs. the Fatal 5 had everything going for it. Classic cast members, a new corner of the DC universe, and my favorite Green Lantern, Jessica Cruz. The result, however, is torn between trying to invest in the new characters it presents, while showing the classic versions of characters audiences came for. It fails to balance the old with the new. So, of course I fear the same happening to my beloved X-Men. It's been even longer since that show originally ended, over 25 years in fact, so long that the new show is animated in an entirely different way than its predecessor. The show didn't end perfectly. Many of the episodes of the final season are almost unwatchable, but the charm of the first 4 seasons far outweighs the last. I don't want X-Men to be revived just so much can be put on shelves months too early, and people online can talk about all the cool references and Easter eggs. I want something that carries on the legacy via having good stories and deep characters. A lot of the marketing for the show centers around a classic VHS aesthetic, calling back to when the show was first airing. The title in and of itself also strongly focuses on the era of the original show. X-Men 97 is the subtitle, just harkening back to when the show originally came out. It's a very popular trope trope in a post-Stranger Things world to set a show in the past few decades, taking the viewer back to a time before all these newfangled smartphones and tic-tacs. However, that's not the world X-Men 97 exists in anymore. While trying to be a progressive show, it also is going to have to contend with this glorification of the past. I love the 90s. I love the shows, games, comics, the vibes, but sometimes we have to accept it will never be that time again. We live in an imperfect world, but we can't look to the future by constantly clinging on to the past, for better or worse. This, however, is also pessimistic. For all we know, the show might turn out great. Even then, I'm not sure a continuation is necessary. I've mentioned my love for 90s X-Men, but like Scoob, that is not the only X-Men. Sure, the 90s X-Men show is my favorite, but I would be remiss not to mention my love for X-Men Evolution. It's such a good show, and it really takes the X-Men into the world of the early 2000s without being connected to the movie world. The characters here are great, and for some of the characters such as Scott and Jean, I like their versions here more than their 90s show versions. It is also able to mix up the team's roster and include members such as Kitty Pryde who weren't in the 90s show. It even introduced entirely new characters such as Spike and X-23, who has gone in to be in her own comic series and been a main character in the movie Logan. We get lots of time with the villains in the show and lots of time in more slice-of-life scenarios with low stakes that lead to important character relationships building. And did the OG X-Men show ever have an episode where all the ladies had a secret vigilante team with an entire music video sequence in it? I don't think so. It was fresh and new and offered an also great look at the X-Men franchise. Then there's also Wolverine in the X-Men, which, while not my favorite, is the only one to heavily feature Psylocke, one of my fave underrated characters, and the subplot with Nightcrawler and Scarlet Witch is pretty interesting. So far, all the X-Men cartoons have heavily reflected the decade they came out in. 90s X-Men mixed with a high-stakes drama with big action and villains. The 2000s X-Men Evolution showed us younger versions of the heroes balancing their personal and superhero lives, growing into the heroes they would become. The 2010s with Wolverine and the X-Men try and put the superheroes in a more gritty and supposedly realistic world. Circling back to X-Men 97, I guess it would have been nice to see something new instead of coming back to something we've already experienced. Sure, my favorite show is the 90s one, but that doesn't mean it was the only great one, or that it didn't have its own flaws, such as sexualizing female characters, frequent animation goofs, and the entire final season. And I also don't care for the idea that the 90s was the best, unbeatable era for superhero cartoons. It has some of the best to be sure, but it also isn't the end-all be-all. There are plenty of recent animated superhero shows that I think are phenomenal. Invincible, Rise of the TMNT, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. I would argue that My Adventures with Superman is actually better than Superman the Animated Series, with its beautiful animation and fresh takes on characters that have been around since 1938. This show would have never happened if we decided that Superman the Animated Series was the best we were ever going to get. It shows that the modern day has its own quirks and place in the pop culture landscape. With animated shows looking better than ever and plenty of creatives showcasing beautiful projects, I hope before the 2020s are over, we can get an X-Men show that reflects the decade, that showcases what a modern X-Men show could be, especially after a decade dominated by Avengers. I want my uncanny faves to be back in the spotlight without relying on the nostalgia of the past. I say, let's get some all-new X-Men in here. Again, I'm still excited for X-Men 97 to be made. I just wish that we could get something new. 90s X-Men will always hold a special place in my heart. Part of that is just the age I watched it at, as I'm sure it is for many people, as it affects how we see the world. And I think that also ties into my wish for something new. In a video full of DC references, let's tie this back to something a little more Marvel. Spectacular Spider-Man is a beloved show, and it is many people's favorite Spider-Man show. The villains are teased early on, the designs are all crisp, and it had an earworm of a theme song. But I never watched Spectacular growing up. I instead watched a lot of Ultimate Spider-Man, a show that tied into the Avengers and Agents of S.M.A.S.H. shows going on around then as well, creating a little Marvel television universe. I remember staying home sick from school, sitting on the couch under a heavy comforter, and watching the Vulture episode on Disney XD on demand. I remember the high stakes of the symbiote saga, and the crossover with Disney Channel sitcom Jessie. It didn't matter that it wasn't the best Spider-Man show, just that it was my Spider-Man show. I want a new X-Men show to introduce a new generation of fans to the merry Marvel mutants. A couple final thoughts before we wrap things up. Morph being non-binary is a step in the right direction of representation, but having the shapeshifter be non-binary is a little cliche, though ultimately not the worst trans representation Marvel has ever made. Honestly, the worst part about it is that it means we'll be getting more Morph in the show, and I don't know who was really clamoring for that, especially in a show with already so few episodes. Seeing all the X-Men 97 merch in Target months before the show premiered was pretty funny. In a digital era where toy sales make up less of a show's profit, seeing a series come back from the past to try and sell toys, only to have them released too early is a little poetic. Lastly, seeing people call the new Rogue design woke because she doesn't have a large behind anymore makes me think that some people are somehow online more than I am, which is truly baffling. So at the culmination of this video, I am excited for X-Men 97. Excited, but cautious. It has the chance to remedy mistakes of the past, or to tarnish a great corner of the X-Men universe. I'll watch the show and I hope we all enjoy it, but I also hope we can get a truly new X-Men cartoon soon. I suppose all there is to do now is wait and hope for a miracle.